I hadn't planned on staying long that night. It was one of those casual get-togethers, a few friends, some background music, the faint clink of glasses, and the hum of conversations all running over each other. I came mostly out of habit, more out of politeness than excitement. The room was warm with lamplight, soft golden tones spilling over faces I'd seen countless times before. Everyone seemed to fall into easy laughter, into familiar stories they'd told a dozen times. I stood near the edge of the room, drink in hand, letting their voices blur into the kind of background noise you can almost disappear into. And that's when I noticed her. She wasn't part of the center of attention, not the loudest laugh, not the one telling stories. Instead, she stood just slightly apart, close enough to be included, but with a kind of quiet self-possession that made her presence even more magnetic. The first thing I noticed was her smile. It was gentle, practiced, the kind of smile someone wears when they know how to be gracious but don't necessarily want to give too much away. But her eyes were different. They carried something deeper, something that made me pause. I couldn't place it at first. Maybe it was the way they moved slowly across the room, taking everything in without demanding to be seen. Maybe it was the faint trace of tiredness there, the kind that doesn't come from the day, but from years of holding yourself steady. But whatever it was, the moment her gaze flickered over to me, I felt it. It wasn't the kind of glance you brush off. It was quick, almost unintentional, but in it there was recognition, like she had been expecting me without even knowing it. I looked away, pretending to listen to the conversation beside me, but the awareness of her stayed. The faint fragrance of her perfume drifted once as she walked past, a soft, floral note that lingered just long enough to unsettle me. She carried herself with ease, every movement deliberate but never forced, as if grace came naturally to her. And though she didn't say a word to me then, I found myself attuned to her presence more than to anyone else in the room. It's strange how a crowded space can feel empty when your attention narrows to one person. My friends kept talking. The laughter rose and fell, but all I could think about was that fleeting look, how her eyes had met mine as though they held a secret I wasn't yet meant to understand. And it struck me, even in that first quiet moment, she wasn't here simply to be seen. She was here to be found. As the night wore on, the living room only grew louder. Music turned up a notch, voices overlapping, laughter spilling over each other in waves. I stayed, though my mind was already wandering. That's when I noticed her again. She had slipped away from the center, almost unnoticed, stepping out toward the porch. Something about the way she moved, calm, unhurried, pulled at me. A few minutes later, I found myself drifting in the same direction, as if following a quiet pull I didn't want to admit out loud. The air outside was cooler, carrying the faint smell of night-blooming flowers and damp earth. A soft hush replaced the noise inside, broken only by the creak of the wooden boards beneath my shoes. She was there, seated on a chair near the railing, her posture relaxed but thoughtful, her glass resting lightly between her fingers. The porch light cast a warm glow over her, outlining the curve of her shoulders, the faint shimmer of her hair. She looked out toward the garden as if the night sky itself held her attention. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but she noticed me anyway. Her lips curved into the kind of smile that isn't meant to draw you closer, but somehow does. "Needed some air too?" she asked softly. I nodded, stepping closer, resting a hand on the railing beside her. "It's a little loud in there." She chuckled quietly, eyes turning back toward the yard. "It always gets that way. I like the quiet better." And just like that, the distance between us closed, not in steps, but in understanding. We spoke first of simple things, the music still faintly playing from inside, books we'd read, places we'd visited. But as the minutes slipped by, the conversation deepened. She had a way of speaking that wasn't rushed. Every word seemed chosen, thoughtful, like she wanted to savor even the small talk. I found myself watching her hands as she spoke, how they traced small, absent patterns along the rim of her glass, how sometimes her fingers brushed against her cheek when she paused to think. Small gestures, but they carried a softness that drew me in. When she laughed, it wasn't loud, but it lingered. Warm, low, as though it was meant only for the person beside her. And though there were people inside who had known her far longer than I had, I felt, in that moment, that I was seeing something rare, something she didn't show just anyone. The porch creaked when I leaned a little closer, enough that the space between us shrank, though I was careful not to cross it fully. The night stretched around us, cool and calm, yet the air felt charged, alive in a way the crowded room never had. Her eyes met mine again, steady this time, and I couldn't shake the thought. Maybe she hadn't been waiting for quiet at all. Maybe she had been waiting for me. The longer we sat there, the more the world inside faded. The porch became its own little universe, just the two of us, a dim light above, and the low hum of crickets carrying the silence between words. It felt like time had slowed, as though it was giving us permission to say the things we usually kept hidden. She turned her glass slowly in her hands, the liquid catching faint bits of light. For a while she didn't speak, and I thought maybe the moment was passing. But then, in a voice softer than before, she said, "You ever feel like people stop seeing you after a while?" The question lingered in the cool air. Ich glänzte her. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a quiet honesty, the kind that slips out when someone finally feels safe enough to let their guard down. Her eyes didn't meet mine immediately. They stayed fixed on the dark stretch of garden, as if it was easier to talk to the shadows. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. She gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "When you're younger, people notice everything about you. Your laugh, your presence, even the way you walk into a room. But over time," she let out a slow breath, "over time you become background. Necessary, reliable, but invisible." Her words settled heavily inside me. There was no drama in them, no attempt at pity. Just truth, spoken so plainly it almost hurt to hear. I leaned on the railing, turning toward her. "I don't think you're invisible." That made her laugh softly, an amused, almost disbelieving sound. "That's kind of you to say." "I mean it," I said, and my voice must have carried something different, because this time she did look at me. And when she did, there was something raw in her gaze, like a curtain had been pulled back. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The porch light caught the faint glint of moisture in her eyes, though she blinked it away quickly. A lock of her hair had fallen across her face, brushing against her cheek in the breeze. "You've got," I started, lifting a hand instinctively before stopping myself. "A strand of hair," I finished, gesturing vaguely. Her fingers reached up, tucking it back behind her ear with a small, self-conscious laugh. "Thanks." It was such a small thing, that moment, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that comes when someone realizes they've been noticed in the smallest of ways. Her shoulders seemed to ease, her posture softening as if she didn't have to hold everything so tightly anymore. And I felt it then, an unspoken shift. She wasn't just telling me about her loneliness. She was letting me step into it, trusting me to sit there with her without trying to fix it or turn it into something else. And in that quiet space, under the faint glow of a porch light, she was no longer invisible. She was more present, more alive than anyone else I had ever seen. The night air carried a cooler edge now, drifting across the porch in gentle waves. It slipped under the collar of my shirt and brushed against my skin. I noticed her shiver, not dramatically, just a faint tremor through her shoulders, the kind that someone tries to mask but can't fully hide. Without thinking too much, I slipped off my jacket. "Here," I said softly, holding it out. She looked at me, almost startled by the gesture, then smiled with that graceful kind of reluctance. The kind people wear when they aren't used to being cared for. "You don't have to." "I know," I replied. "But I want to." After a pause, she accepted. As I leaned in to place the jacket over her shoulders, the fabric brushed against her skin. My fingers, steady but aware of themselves, skimmed along her arm for the briefest moment. Just a touch, accidental by circumstance, but it left a warmth that lingered. She adjusted the jacket around her, pulling it close, her eyes downcast for a heartbeat before she glanced back up at me. "Thank you," she said, and though the words were simple, the way she said them carried something heavier, like gratitude that ran deeper than a borrowed coat. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, humming with something unsaid. I leaned back against the railing, close enough now that our shoulders angled toward each other without fully meeting. The distance between us was shrinking, not in steps, but in quiet admissions neither of us voiced. She drew the jacket tighter, inhaling faintly. "It smells like you," she said, almost to herself, her voice barely more than a murmur. When she realized she'd spoken aloud, she let out a quick laugh, shaking her head as if to brush it away. But I caught it, every word, and my chest tightened, not with pride, but with the startling realization that she had let herself slip, just for a second, into honesty. Her hand rested on her lap, fingers slowly curling and uncurling, as though even she felt the restless energy threading between us. The porch seemed smaller, the air heavier, though nothing had changed except the awareness we now carried. I found myself studying the way the lamplight softened the edges of her profile, how the jacket seemed oversized around her, but somehow perfect. And in that stillness, I realized something. It wasn't about the jacket. It wasn't even about the touch. It was about the way she let me step closer into her world, even just slightly, without pushing me away. The night stretched on, the noises from inside muffled and distant, and yet every second felt sharper, clearer. My arm still remembered the heat of her skin, my hand the quiet jolt of contact. It was the smallest of moments. But sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. The night had grown quieter. Inside, the laughter and music still pulsed faintly through the walls, but out here on the porch, it was as though we had stepped into another world. The air hung still, the kind of stillness that makes even the smallest sound feel amplified. The creak of wood when one of us shifted, the soft clink of her glass against the railing, the rustle of leaves beyond the garden fence. Our words had slowed too. Conversation that once flowed easily now gave way to long pauses, stretches of silence that didn't feel empty but instead brimmed with something unspoken. I could feel it, the weight of what hovered between us like a current neither of us had named but both knew was there. She sat angled slightly toward me now, her body relaxed, but her expression carrying a quiet tension, as though she was holding back words she couldn't quite say. I caught myself studying her, really studying her, the curve of her jaw in the porch light, the way her fingers played absently with the sleeve of my jacket. She wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't putting on the polished smile she had worn earlier in the evening. She was simply herself, unguarded in a way that made my chest ache. And then it happened. Her eyes found mine, steady, searching, almost startling in their clarity. This wasn't the quick glance of polite conversation or the casual acknowledgement of a stranger. This was something else. Her gaze held mine as though she had been waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to finally understand. It felt as though time slowed. The faint noises around us dulled until there was nothing but her eyes and the thrum of my heartbeat in my ears. There was no script to that look, no practice lines, no effort to disguise it. It was raw, naked, almost vulnerable, and in it I saw so much. A quiet longing she hadn't spoken aloud, a recognition, like she was remembering something familiar in me. And, most startling of all, a sense that perhaps she had been carrying this moment inside her long before it arrived. I swallowed, realizing my breath had caught. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. Maybe that was the point. Maybe nothing needed to be spoken. The air between us was alive now, charged in a way that made every small movement feel monumental. She didn't look away. Neither did I. It wasn't passion rushing forward. It wasn't impulsive. It was slower, deeper, like a thread that had been quietly weaving between us all night and had finally pulled taut. And in that moment, under the dim porch light, I understood something I couldn't name, but felt with absolute certainty. She wasn't just looking at me. She was seeing me, as if she had been waiting all along. The stillness between us stretched on, heavy but not uncomfortable, more like the breath held just before something inevitable. My heart beat louder than I wanted it to, and I wondered if she could hear it in the quiet. I leaned forward slightly, not enough to close the space, but enough to let her feel it, the pull, the admission. My hand rested on the railing, fingers splayed against the weathered wood. The night smelled faintly of jasmine and damp earth, the kind of scent that makes you slow down and notice where you are. She didn't pull back. If anything, she shifted ever so slightly closer, the movement subtle but undeniable. Her shoulders brushed against the sleeve of my shirt, a feather-light contact that sent a quiet shiver through me. For a long moment, nothing happened. We just sat there, breathing the same night air, our silence speaking louder than words. And then, almost hesitantly, her hand moved. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. Her fingers drifted toward mine along the railing, brushing softly, as though testing the space first. A tentative touch, gentle and deliberate, like someone stepping into shallow water to see how cold it is. I stilled, not daring to move too quickly. The brush became a linger, her fingers resting against the edge of my hand, warm and delicate. Slowly, carefully, she let them slide over until her hand found mine fully. Her skin was soft, her grip light at first, but the weight of it carried more meaning than anything she had spoken all night. My thumb moved instinctively, grazing along the side of her hand, and I felt her exhale, subtle, but unsteady enough to betray that this moment meant something to her too. The air between us shifted then, thick with a quiet electricity. Not lust, not urgency, but something richer, a longing that had been held back and was only now beginning to reveal itself. I looked at her, but she kept her gaze down on our hands, as though even seeing the moment might make it too real. And when she finally did lift her eyes, there was no hesitation left in them, only acceptance. We didn't speak. Words would have felt clumsy, too heavy for the delicacy of what was happening. Instead, we let the silence carry it. The warmth of skin against skin, the soft press of her thumb resting against mine, the steady thrum of connection pulsing between us. I realized then that this wasn't just touch. It was trust. It was her saying, without saying it, that she was willing to let me in, even if just an inch at a time. And as we sat there, fingers entwined in the quiet of summer night, the distance we had carried all evening dissolved into something fragile, intimate, and entirely real. The world around us seemed to have disappeared, narrowed down to the warmth of her hand in mine and the quiet rhythm of our breaths. It could have gone on forever, that fragile silence, if not for the muffled call from inside, the familiar sound of friends gathering dishes, voices announcing goodbyes, the gentle reminder that the night was reaching its end. She sighed, almost imperceptibly, as though the spell had been broken too soon. Her fingers loosened slightly, though she didn't pull away right away. Instead, she let the touch linger, one last deliberate brush of her hand against mine before she slowly withdrew. Even in that simple movement, I could feel her reluctance. She rose to her feet, smoothing the jacket I had draped around her shoulders. It hung a little loose on her frame, yet it looked right on her, as though it belonged there, at least for tonight. She straightened it with a small, unconscious tug, then turned toward me with that same poised smile she'd worn earlier in the evening. But now I could see past it. I knew what lived beneath it. Well, she said softly, her voice low enough that it didn't carry beyond the porch. I should go back in. I nodded, though part of me wanted to ask her to stay a moment longer, to hold on to this fragile corner of the night we'd made for ourselves. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, me too." But she didn't move right away. She lingered there in front of me, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and hesitation, between longing and restraint. And then, before I could think of anything else to say, she stepped closer. Her hand lifted lightly to my chest, resting there just for a breath, her touch soft but steady. I felt the faint pressure of her palm through the thin fabric of my shirt, and beneath it, my own heartbeat, unsteady and loud in the quiet night. She leaned in, slow enough that I could have stepped back if I wanted to, but I didn't. Her lips brushed my cheek, the faintest, most delicate press, lingering just a fraction longer than courtesy required. The warmth of it stayed even after she pulled back, her perfume surrounding me, subtle and unforgettable. "Good night," she whispered, almost as if the word itself was too fragile to say any louder. And then she was gone, turning, walking back toward the open door, the porch light catching her figure one last time before she disappeared inside. I stayed where I was, the echo of her touch still burning in my skin, the soft imprint of her kiss etched into my cheek. The world around me slowly returned, the sound of glasses clinking, voices calling their goodbyes. But I felt apart from it now, as though I had stepped into something different, something no one else in that house had witnessed. Because when she looked at me that night, it wasn't casual. It wasn't chance. It was as if she had been waiting, patient and silent, for that exact moment all along. And I knew, without question, that nothing would ever feel quite the same again.